It started as an ordinary evening, just another weekend when my friend Asher texted me out of nowhere, asking if I could come over. His message was casual, "Come hang out, the boys are here too," but something about it felt different. Maybe it was the timing. Maybe it was the fact that he hadn't called me bro like he always did. Still, I agreed. I didn't know that this night would shift the way I looked at him, and at myself. When I reached their house, the air felt heavy with laughter and a faint scent of cologne. Asher's three cousins, Saad, Imran, and Daniel, were already sitting in the living room, the sound of a soft playlist echoing from the speaker. They greeted me warmly, though I noticed their glances lingered a little too long. I told myself it was just my imagination. Asher looked different that night. Maybe it was the way his shirt hugged his shoulders, or the calm, confident smile he wore. He always made me feel seen in ways no one else did, but I had never questioned why. Tonight, though, that feeling began to burn. They talked about random things, college memories, funny videos, failed relationships. I laughed along, but every time Asher looked at me, the laughter caught in my throat. There was something unspoken between us, something we both avoided naming. I tried to shake it off by focusing on the conversation, but the tension hung there, quiet and steady. At one point, Daniel got up to grab drinks, and Saad playfully said, "You two always stick together." His tone was teasing, but it pierced through me. I caught Asher's eye, and for a split second, he looked away, guilty, nervous, unsure. The silence that followed said everything words couldn't. Later, Asher asked me to help him move something from the storeroom. The house was dim, shadows stretching across the walls as we walked down the hallway. Inside the room, it was quiet except for our breaths. He looked at me not as a friend, but as someone he couldn't hide from anymore. I froze, caught between fear and something I couldn't name. "Asher," I whispered, but my voice broke before I could say anything else. He stepped closer, and I could see his chest rising, trembling slightly. "You don't have to pretend," he said softly. "I know." For a moment, the world fell away. The laughter from the living room faded. It was just us, two people standing in the middle of something forbidden, something neither of us planned. I didn't move. I didn't speak. And yet, the silence between us felt louder than words. I wanted to tell him it was wrong. That he had someone in his life, and I wasn't supposed to be here. But instead, I stayed. My heart was racing, my thoughts blurred. When he finally spoke again, his voice cracked. "I didn't mean for this to happen. But when you're around, I can't think straight." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just confusion. It was connection, messy, complicated, and real. And it was breaking every rule. We stood there for what felt like hours, saying nothing more. Then a sudden knock on the door startled us. It was one of his cousins calling out, "What's taking so long?" The world came rushing back, the weight of what almost happened pressing on us. Asher stepped back, his eyes full of regret. When we returned to the others, nothing looked the same. The jokes continued, the music played, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed forever. Asher avoided my eyes, pretending everything was fine. But I knew, and he knew, that one moment of silence had already rewritten everything between us. The next morning felt heavier than the night before. I woke up replaying every second in that storeroom, wondering if it had all been in my head, the look in his eyes, the unspoken words, the closeness that almost turned into something else. But deep down, I knew it wasn't imagination. Something real had passed between us, something we couldn't undo. Asher texted me later that day. Just a simple, "You good?" Nothing more. I stared at the message for a while, unsure how to respond. I typed "yeah" and deleted it. Typed again, "I'm fine." Deleted that too. Finally, I just left it on scene. For days, I tried to go back to normal life, but every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it was him. And when it was, my heart ached even more. The worst part wasn't what almost happened, it was the silence that followed. The distance he built between us said more than any confession could. A week later, he invited me again, said his cousins were hosting another get-together. I didn't want to go, but I did. Maybe I needed closure. Maybe I wanted to see if he still looked at me the same way. When I arrived, the atmosphere felt different. The cousins were cheerful, but Asher avoided my eyes. He laughed louder than usual, talked more than he needed to, like he was trying to bury something. I watched him from across the room, wondering if he felt the same guilt twisting inside me. At one point, I stepped outside to get some air. The night sky was calm, but my mind was chaos. I heard footsteps behind me, and when I turned, it was him. He stood there, quiet for a moment before saying, "I didn't know you'd come." His voice was lower this time, tired, maybe scared. "I wasn't going to," I admitted. "But I needed to know if that night meant anything to you." He didn't answer right away. His hands fidgeted, his gaze locked somewhere on the ground. "It did," he said finally. "Too much." I looked at him, searching for honesty in his voice. "Then why are you acting like it didn't?" "Because it's wrong," he said sharply. "I'm not supposed to feel this. I have someone. You know that." His words hit like a slap, but behind them, I heard the pain he was trying to hide. "You think I don't wake up hating myself for it," he added. The silence that followed was suffocating. The sound of distant laughter from inside made it worse, a cruel reminder that we were surrounded by people who couldn't know. I wanted to tell him that I understood. That love doesn't always arrive in the right form, at the right time, or with the right person. "I'm not asking for anything," I whispered. "I just don't want to pretend like nothing happened." He looked at me, then really looked. His eyes were glassy, his jaw tight. "You make it hard to breathe sometimes," he said quietly. "When you walk into a room, everything else disappears. And that scares me more than anything." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us hummed with something raw and fragile. Then, as if realizing the danger of what he'd just admitted, he stepped back. "We can't do this," he said, almost pleading. Before I could respond, Saad opened the door and called out, "You two okay? Come back inside, we're starting a game." Asher turned away, forcing a smile, pretending again. Inside, everything carried on as if nothing had changed. But I could feel his eyes on me now and then, quick, nervous glances that gave away the storm inside him. I laughed when everyone else did, but it felt hollow. Later that night, as I was leaving, he followed me to the gate. He didn't say a word, just handed me my jacket. Our fingers brushed for a second, enough to make my heart race all over again. Then he whispered, "Don't stop coming over. I don't know how to handle this, but don't disappear on me." I nodded slowly, not trusting my voice. I knew I was walking into something dangerous, a love built on borrowed moments and quiet betrayals. But I couldn't stay away.
That night, after I returned home, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, calm, distant, yet full of something unspoken. It wasn't attraction in the ordinary sense. It was something heavier, something that lingered quietly between two people who didn't dare to cross the line but still knew it existed. That I tried to distract myself with my phone, scrolling endlessly through social media, replying to random messages, even watching videos until the screen blurred. But no matter what I did, my mind went back to that moment in his study, the way he had looked at me, the way his voice had softened when he spoke about honesty and hidden selves. The next morning, Amir texted me. He said his father had mentioned I was a thoughtful young man. The words hit differently. I didn't know if that was praise or something deeper. I typed a reply, erased it, and then just sent a simple smile emoji. Days passed, and life went back to its usual rhythm. College, assignments, laughter, and late-night group chats. Yet somewhere underneath, that evening stayed alive, like a quiet hum you stop noticing but never stop hearing. Then, one Thursday afternoon, Amir asked if I could help him with a project at his house. I hesitated. My fingers paused over the keyboard for a moment before I finally typed, "Sure, I'll come after class." When I reached his house again, the feeling of familiarity was mixed with a strange nervousness. His father's car wasn't outside, and I felt relieved. Inside, Amir greeted me cheerfully and pulled me straight to his room. For hours, we worked together, laughing over mistakes and sharing snacks. It felt normal again, like nothing had ever happened. By evening, Amir's mother called us for dinner. While we ate, the sound of the front door opening caught my attention. I looked up, and there he was. His father had returned, still wearing his office clothes, his sleeves rolled halfway up his arms. He looked tired, but when our eyes met, that same calm expression crossed his face. That he greeted everyone casually, then sat across from me at the table. For a few minutes, we all talked about ordinary things, exams, weather, work. But in between words, our eyes met briefly, then looked away, as if the silence between us carried more meaning than anything else spoken aloud. After dinner, Amir went to drop his mother at her sister's house nearby. "We'll be back soon," he said. I nodded. The moment the door closed behind them, the house fell into a quiet stillness that I tried to keep busy, cleared the table, helped put dishes away, but then his father said, in a calm tone, "You can sit for a while. You don't have to rush." I sat on the couch, unsure what to say. He poured himself a glass of water and then took a seat across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The ticking clock on the wall filled the silence. Finally, he said, "You've been avoiding me, haven't you?" I froze, unsure how to answer. "No. I just thought it was better to keep some distance," I replied quietly. He smiled faintly. "Sometimes distance doesn't help. It only makes the silence louder." His words felt like a whisper meant more for himself than for me. I looked at him, the calmness, the restraint, the weariness of someone who had learned to live with unsaid truths. That he sighed softly and leaned back. "You remind me of the person I used to be, before I learned to hide parts of myself just to fit in." That sentence hung in the air for a long time. I wanted to ask what he meant, but part of me already knew. The loneliness in his voice was enough of an answer. That he told me how, as he grew older, expectations became walls, family, reputation, roles that left no space for self-discovery. "People think time makes you wiser," he said, "but sometimes it just teaches you how to pretend better." I didn't know what to say. My chest felt heavy, not because of sympathy alone, but because I could relate, in a smaller, quieter way. "I'm not saying this to confuse you," he continued softly. "I just want you to remember, never silence who you are to make others comfortable. It will cost you more than you can imagine." I nodded slowly. His eyes softened, and for the first time, there was peace in his expression, as if speaking those words had released something inside him. That we sat there for a while, two people separated by years and circumstance but somehow connected through understanding. When the sound of the front gate opened again, he stood up quickly. "They're back," he said, his tone returning to normal. "Let's not make it awkward." I smiled faintly and nodded. As Amir and his mother walked in, everything shifted back into its usual rhythm. We laughed, talked about random things, and pretended nothing had been said, but deep inside, I knew that moment mattered, maybe not as a turning point, but as a quiet revelation. Later that night, as I left the house, he stood by the door again. The same place where he had stood last time. The streetlights glowed behind him, throwing long shadows on the floor. "Take care of yourself," he said softly. "You too," I replied. That as I walked down the street, I didn't look back, but I could still feel his gaze following me, not in a way that trapped me, but in a way that lingered, like an unfinished sentence waiting for an ending that would never come. For days after that, I thought about what he'd said, about pretending, about silence, about the parts of ourselves we bury to keep others comfortable. His words stayed with me more than any confession or declaration ever could. It wasn't love. It wasn't friendship either. It was something in between, something human, fragile, and real. Sometimes life brings people into your path not to stay, but to reflect a part of you that you didn't know existed. That's what he became, a mirror that showed me my own uncertainty, my own longing to be understood, and though we never spoke about it again, that evening became a quiet truth between us, one that didn't need words, one that lived in silence, and one that would always remind me that connection doesn't always need to be loud to be meaningful. Weeks turned into months, yet that evening at Amir's house never really left me. It lived quietly in my memory, not as a regret, but as a strange, unfinished chapter. Sometimes, I wondered if he ever thought about that conversation again, or if it had simply faded into the background of his daily life. For me, though, it had changed something subtle, the way I saw people, the way I listened to them, the way I understood silence. Life moved forward. Exams came and went, friends drifted in and out of routines, and I got busy planning for my final year. But every now and then, I'd walk past the lane that led to Amir's house. I never turned in, yet each time, I'd slow down for a second, as if waiting for something, maybe even someone. Then one day, Amir told me his family was moving to another city. His father had been transferred for work. He sounded excited, but for a brief second, I felt something sink inside me. The next weekend, I went over to help them pack. The house looked half empty, filled with boxes and scattered memories. Amir's mother handed me a tray of snacks as usual, smiling warmly, unaware of the quiet story that lived between her husband and me. In the middle of the chaos, Amir's father appeared in the hallway. Our eyes met briefly, just like before. No words were needed. That same silence, the same understanding, returned, but now it felt softer, calmer. Later, when Amir went out to run an errand, his father found me in the living room, folding books into a box. That he stood there for a moment, as if deciding whether to speak. Then he said, quietly, "You've grown." I looked up and smiled faintly. Maybe I just learned to listen better. He nodded slowly. "I'm glad. You have a good heart. Don't let the world make it quiet." His voice carried the same sincerity I had felt that night in the study, but now it was lighter, not heavy with conflict, just gentle with acceptance. There was a short silence between us again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful, like two people who finally understood that some bonds don't need to be named or explained. Before I left, he extended his hand. I shook it, and in that simple gesture, 1,000 unspoken things were exchanged: gratitude, respect, memory, closure. When I stepped outside, the sun was setting behind the rooftops. The air smelled like dust and jasmine. I stood there for a while, watching the light fade, realizing that sometimes people enter your life not to stay, but to teach you something about yourself. He had done exactly that. For weeks after they left, the emptiness felt strange. I'd catch myself remembering his words, the way he said them: "Never silence who you are to make others comfortable." Those words stayed with me. They became a quiet guide, something I returned to whenever I doubted myself. Over time, I began to understand that not every connection is meant to become a story that the world can see. Some are meant to stay hidden, not out of shame, but because they belong to a space that's too delicate for labels. Years passed. I finished college, moved to another city, and built a life that felt honest, not perfect, but mine. I learned to speak my truth more openly, to live without apology for who I was. Every now and then, I'd think of Amir's father, not as a person I once met, but as a moment that changed me. He had shown me what quiet courage looks like, the kind that exists in the spaces between words, in glances, in silence. One evening, years later, while sorting through old files, I found a photograph, the one from Amir's housewarming dinner years ago. Everyone was smiling. He was standing in the corner, half in shadow, half in light. I looked at that photo for a long time and felt something warm and calm rise inside me. There was no longing anymore, no confusion. Only gratitude, for that brief intersection of two lives that somehow made both a little more human. I placed the photo back in the drawer, closed it gently, and smiled to myself, because I finally understood, some stories don't need a perfect ending. They just need to be remembered, quietly, truthfully, and with a full heart. That night, as I sat by the window watching the city lights flicker below, I whispered softly, not to anyone but to the silence itself, "Thank you, for reminding me who I am." And with that, the story that had begun in a quiet house on an ordinary evening finally found its peace.